Good evening. Welcome to the Walker Arts Center. My name is Andrew Blauvelt. I'm the Design Director and Curator of Architecture and Design. I'd like to welcome you to Insights 2006 and actually our final installment of the 20th anniversary year. It's been a long 20-year collaboration with the American Institute of Graphic Arts Minnesota chapter, and one that's been phenomenally successful is that last series of names that have appeared at Insights over the last 20 years. I just have a few announcements before I'll turn things over to Doug Powell, who introduced tonight's speaker. First is just a general comment that we're webcasting all of these lectures, and they can be found at channel.walkerart.org. And those webcasts go back a few years. We've been doing this the last few years, and I've heard that they're actually quite good. So if you need to reference it, you can there. But also because of that, we would like to be able to hear the questions in the Q&A period following the lecture. So we'll have people positioned in the aisles with microphones, and if we'd ask if you could stand up, and then they could find you, and then they can hand you the microphone, and that way we can record your question on the webcast, so people at home will know what the answers are about. I'd also like to thank Doug Powell for helping me organize and getting the people together that you've been seeing over the last 4 weeks, reminiscing about their Insights experience, and of course to thank all of those people who participated in the video and making of it, and the technical production is handled in-house by our AV department, in particular Brian Deller, who recorded and edited the tape, and along with the support of Eleanor Savage, who directs that department. And officially, we'd like to thank Millennium Hotels as the official hotelier of the Walker Arts Center for their sponsorship and help in the series, as well as Shapko Printing, which has done the same. I think I'd like to we were making one announcement because we were unable to announce this event earlier in all of our materials and calendars, and that's next week on Monday, April 3rd at 7 p.m. in the cinema, this space. We will have a conversation between Chrissy Isles and Philippe Verne, who are the two curators of this year's Whitney Biennial. And it's an interesting, kind of rare event to have the two curators here. Philippe, as many of you may know, is now the new chief curator of the Walker Arts Center. And Chrissy Isles has been at the Whitney Museum of American Art for many years, and she's curated several biennials. And they will be in conversation, and it should be pretty interesting. It's one of the most talked about exhibitions of American art, and many Minnesota artists are featured in it. So I hope you will be able to join us for that. Tickets are $5 and are available through our box office. I'd like to turn it over now to Doug Powell, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. The video presentation that we saw earlier really demonstrates the amazing array of design voices that have been presented during the 20-year history of Insights. And as Andrew and I were planning this year's series, we really wanted to honor that heritage of diversity. After the first 3 weeks of the series, I think we've accomplished that. Oops. Beginning with week one, with the Bill Grant of the Grant Design Collaborative and their strategic, process-driven work. Week two with the whimsical, fresh, and intuitive work of Wink. And then last week, the stunningly conceptual and fearless work of Mavis and Van Dersen. We've really covered a lot of territory in this series, and despite their differences, each of these presentations has presented examples of remarkably successful design. Tonight, we're poised to cap this series with a speaker who will, again, take us into spectacularly uncharted territory. To say that Chip Kidd designs book jackets would be a gross understatement. In fact, his work in this very unique and demanding segment of our profession has helped to spawn a revolution in the art of American book design. In addition to the usual industry awards, his work has been profiled in such mainstream publications as Vanity Fair, Entertainment Weekly, The New Republic, and The New York Times. Chip Kidd is also an eloquent and sometimes harsh critic of design in the industry press and the mainstream media, having contributed to McSweeney's, Vogue, ID, and print magazines, among others. As if this weren't enough, Mr. Kidd is also an author himself. In 2001, he published his novel, The Cheese Monkeys, which uses, not surprisingly, graphic design as a central theme. He has also written 3 other books that deal with his not-so-hidden passion of comic books. Chip Kidd, Book 1, a retrospective of his career and work, was published last year. This book will be available in the lobby after the lecture, and Chip will also be doing a book signing at that time. Please join me in welcoming Chip Kidd.
I'd like to thank you all for coming. I was worried that I was going to outnumber you. It's happened. Whenever I'm asked to come and do something like this, inevitably I'm also asked, what will your lecture be called? And I never really know what to say. Giving a name to a lecture seems rather strange. I mean, it's not really a child or anything like that. But people seem to need a title to hold on to avoid getting vertigo. So I endeavor to try and entitle the lectures. Of course, if I was really going to be honest and call it what it is, the title of tonight's lecture would be Chip Kidd Takes an Hour of Your Life Away That You Will Never, Ever Get Back. But if I called it that, nobody would show up. So instead, what I do is, a lot of what I do in the design process when I'm designing book covers or whatever I'm designing is I'm constantly looking for source material to use in the designs, be it photographs or illustrations or things I find on the street or any kind of found object. So I look for verbal found objects for the titles of the lectures. If I'm reading a newspaper or a magazine, I will come upon a phrase that will leap out at me, that will seem interesting, and I'll sort of write it down or file it away or clip it or whatever to use as a potential title for a lecture that if I saw that this was the title of this particular lecture and I read that, I would say, I'd like to go to that. So for this evening, I chose a phrase that I read in Vanity Fair in a review of a concert that was given by Celine Dion at the Sands Casino in Las Vegas. And this particular individual who was reviewing this concert by Celine used a phrase that I thought was just absolutely gorgeous. And it's this. And I read this and I thought, oh, wise one. Yes, yes, yes. And it actually went on to say that at the Sands, while Celine Dion is doing this dreadful thing there, that there's a whole Celine Dion gift shop, in the lobby with, keychains and enema bags and all this kind of stuff that you can get. And I thought, how great would it be if you could buy a T-shirt that said this? It's like Celine Dion Sands, and then this said this on the back. It would be great, but they don't. This is my kindergarten class photo, 1970, Lincoln Park, Pennsylvania. I like this picture because it is the last recorded moment that I was actually attractive. And actually, after I had been with my boyfriend several years, he finally saw this and said, "Who would have thought that anybody so adorable would have grown up to be such a total, utter pervert?" With which I had no comeback. We'll go back 1 year. This is Halloween, 1969, I believe. Lincoln Park, Pennsylvania. That is me on the right. That is my older brother, Walt, on the left. That's my mother in the middle. And we are going trick-or-treating. And this is at the Schmidt's house, 3 doors down. And instead of giving you a treat, they gave you a photograph, which at the time I thought, fuck you. But I've since become very grateful that they did this instead. Candy. Anyway, I have this lovely photo instead, which I enjoy. And we are thick in the Batman frenzy of the Batman show with Adam West as TV on prime time, and we are just absolutely enamored of it. My mother made these costumes for us from scratch. She was a fabulous seamstress, and our parents always helped us every year decide what we wanted to be for Halloween. Alas, my brother was 2 years older, so he always got to be Batman, which meant I had to be Robin, which was fine. No bitterness therein. Anyway, now, of course, we're totally into the Batman craze at this point, as are most of the other kids across the globe because of this TV show. Unlike most of the other kids around the globe, I never got over it. Whereas they did and went on to have families and all this sort of thing. Instead, I basically stayed this person you see on the right. Even though I don't appear to be that anymore, inside, that is who I am. Okay? I love the DC Comics characters, Superman, Batman, the Justice League, and all of them, and retained this love all through my tortured adolescence and into college and beyond. And I've worked on several projects. Once I became a book designer, then I decided to do a couple of books on Batman and propose in the DC Comics, and that all worked. But I'd never actually designed for the comics themselves. And last summer, DC very publicly announced that they were going to basically jumpstart the comic book franchise of Superman and Batman in this new line of comics that they were going to call All-Star. And this was not going to replace what they were already doing, which is the ongoing runs monthly of Superman and Batman and all this, which keeps coming. But this is going to be new. This is going to be, if you've never read any of this stuff before, presumably, they're going to target it at kids, and now you can start afresh, and they wanted to gain a new generation of readership. And the writer of the Batman and Robin title is this guy named Frank Miller, who is now, ironically, probably best known as the orchestrator artist behind Sin City and the movie thereof. And he and I became friends several years ago, and I redesigned all of his Sin City books for when the movie came out. So he insisted to DC that I would be the designer on this series, which is rather unusual for them. They try to keep most of their pure design work in-house. They don't, they freelance most of the art and writing out, well, all of the art and writing out, but in terms of the design and the production stuff, they keep that all in-house. But Frank Miller insisted, so now I'm basically going to be thrust upon them to design these titles. So the first one's going to be Superman, and so I'm just going to do a very short history of the Superman logo, which, again, I'm not going to replace. I want to kind of like do an homage to it. So this is Superman number 1, 1940. And this is the beginning of the now sort of like sacred, charming, three-dimensional letter logo. Jump to the 50s, and they've slickened it up a bit. But it really is what it is. And in terms of the overall design of the comic book cover, it's a bit busy, but it's still charming. With Luthor has turned Lois Lane into concrete, and now he's doing the same to Superman, who will somehow get over it, and lovely. But now we're going to fast forward to the early 90s, and we can see that in terms of design, it's all gone to hell in a handbasket. Just too much kind of scattered typographical information all over the goddamn place, besides the fact that the drawing sucks, but, whatever. So I really want to pull it back to a sense of what I call separation of type and state, which is I like to let the typography kind of live in its own sort of country, and across the border is the image, which lives in its country, and they never go to war. So I'm going to try and do that with this. And what I'm going to do is start with a typeface. This is something called V.F. Sands by Jonathan Heffler, wonderful typographer working today. Actually, this is V.F. Sands italic, I suppose. And what I really like about this is that it's got that great sort of interaction between, it looks contemporary, but it also kind of looks retro to the time when these characters were created, which was the end of the Depression, the late 1930s. And I love what the M is doing with the severe points, and we're going to see what the S is going to be doing, and et cetera, et cetera. So to start with this very basic, put it into Photoshop, and just do that sort of perspective thing that you do in, I think it's called distort. I'm a Photoshop retard, but anyway, even I figured this one out. And so we'll see what happens to the word Superman when we do this. And what's nice about this is that it's got a visual thrust that the original logo doesn't, and it feels like it's flying away from you, Superman. Ooh, there he goes, and we'll see what happens with the S. So I'm going to do the opposite then with Batman and Robin. Instead of flying away from you, they're going to come crashing down through the skylight in the ceiling into your living room or wherever. And what's doubly nice about this is that it puts all the emphasis on Robin. As well it goddamn should. All right, so what are we doing now? Now I'm going to apply this typography to working prototypes. The artist on the Superman series is a guy named Frank Quitely. He's actually Scottish, but we like him anyway. And this is a pre-existing drawing that he had done of Superman in a comic book a couple years previous, and I've extrapolated it from its original context and blown it all up. And repositioned it, and it's almost as if you can see the tail of something that he's saying from a speech balloon to the lower right. It's almost as if what he's saying is so big it can't be contained in the picture plane. And I also love that the S is now echoing the hair swoop thing which is his basically only signature thing on his head because he doesn't wear a mask. And there's just enough information visually to tell you that it's Superman in case you can't read. So we're liking this, and this is the other one again, like this wonderful sort of inadvertent echo of the S and the swirl of hair on his head. Now the Batman artist is a guy named Jim Lee, and he is very, very popular. This is also, again, I don't have any of the actual drawings to work with because we're working so far ahead of time. So I'm just repurposing pre-existing art. This is a Lee picture of Batman that I particularly like and blew up. But of course we like this better because it emphasizes Robin, and Batman can't keep up with him, and because he's got, so much mojo. So these are the prototypes, and they're sort of liking the way this is going. And of course for them, cutting off the type is really radical, and they can't believe I'm doing that. And then I get a call from the art director at DC Comics that the actual real Superman art that we're going to use on the cover has arrived. Now, the thing that you need to know about the staff at DC Comics, as it were, is that they are all 2-to-1 overgrown 15-year-olds, mostly men, who breathe through their mouths and are crazy and have no taste. So the phone rings, and it's the art director from DC Comics, and he says, "Dude, oh my God, we got the Superman art in. It rocks so hard. I am going to send it to you." And which, of course, he does over the internet, and this JPEG thing arrives, and I'm, tremulous with anticipation, and I double-click on it to open it because, fuck, this is the new Superman art, man. We're starting it all over, and it's going to so kick ass. Bring, bring. Oh, so did you get the art? What do you think? And I want to say, Gee, you didn't tell me in this one that Superman's gay. And I'm thinking, well, maybe it's a joke. And then he's like, no, really. We're like, what do you think? Isn't it like so great? And like, to me, this looks like if you're the set photographer for the new Superman movie and they're setting up the shot over there, and so you just have to kill time. So you say, oh, Mr. Superman, would you just like sit over here on this cloud and I'll just do like a publicity photo for the downtime of the movie. And then all the geek questions come in, of which I have many, but, chief among them, you can fly. Why do you need to sit on a goddamn cloud? And why are you looking at me? And why aren't you paying attention to Metropolis, which, probably needs your help right now? There's something awful going on right now, but you're looking at me instead. But, this is a fait accompli. It's not like I have anything to say about this, or I can even art direct it. It's just like I've got to like paste my little type on it. And then the Batman art comes in, which has the total opposite problem. Could this be any busier? To say nothing of the fact that Robin is kicking Batman in the penis. And then all the geek questions come in. If we are where we are when we're looking at this, and they are where they are, and that's where the city is, and they're swinging on ropes, what are the ropes attached to? But again, I have nothing to say about this. All I can do is apply my wares to them. And so these are the Superman and Batman All-Star #1 issues as they went out into the world, and which they did late last year, and of course sold a gazillion copies, and it is what it is. But the little boy in the Robin costume is jumping up and down inside in here, no matter how sucky the art is. Frank Miller, by the way, hated the Superman cover. Of course, he had nothing to do with it, and he said, to me that just says, Superman saying, I can fly and you can't. I liked him as a diptych. Now for something completely different. Anderson Cooper, the correspondent on CNN, his mother, believe it or not, as you may or may not know, is Gloria Vanderbilt. And I have done Gloria's covers for many years, and we become friends, and I've always heard Anderson this and Anderson that, and then he became who he was. And he's got a memoir coming out in June, and it's basically about his experiences of 2005, and starting with the tsunamis, and then the famine in Niger, and then, of course, his, I believe, heroic coverage of Katrina, where he took so many public officials to task for how badly they fucked all that up. And so he approaches me about doing the cover of this book. It's a freelance job. It's at HarperCollins. And so his office basically just starts sending me a ton of images to work with. And there's lots and lots to choose from. And this kind of job becomes kind of like a wonderful sort of puzzle in terms of, I can't include all this, so I've got to like extrapolate parts of it and figure out what's usable and what's not. I don't want it to be a book about CNN. It's more about him in his role at CNN. And it's also about, he intersperses what he's going through in terms of these places that he goes to with memories of his father dying tragically when he was very young, and then his brother dying even more tragically, committing suicide when they were both in their early 20s. And so he's reflecting on those incidents in between, chapters on the tsunami and Katrina and all this kind of thing. And what he concludes when he graduates from Yale is that he wants to be this correspondent who goes to these places that are totally, totally fucked up because he's totally fucked up. And he will feel comfortable in that environment that outwardly is as insane and chaotic as he is inside, and present it to the rest of the world. So Basically what I did was I wanted to create this balance of the events and him. And what I did was I took a detail of one of the earlier pictures of him in front of this campfire and a bonfire in the tsunamis in Sri Lanka, and then this picture of him sort of like in repose, kind of like contemplating how fucked up everything is, and then the treatment of his name is to be like as you would see it on TV, is constantly going by you, and so it builds this sort of like literal fire inside him that's like fueling him and propelling him on, and he really liked this a lot. This will be out in June. As the introduction said, I published a monograph late last year with Rizzoli, which collects 20 years of my book covers, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But one byproduct of that I guess I should have foreseen but didn't, was getting work from it, which was not the reason I did it. But the producer of this, or the director of this play, which is going to debut on Broadway in 2 weeks, it's a guy named Joe Mantello, and he saw my book in a bookstore, and he bought it and he liked it a lot, and then he contacted the ad agency that was going to be doing all the publicity for this play, which is this. And Julia Roberts announced last fall that she was going to be doing this play, and that she would deign to grace the Broadway stage for 13 weeks only, doing 3 Days of Rain. Now, what is 3 Days of Rain? It's a little hard to explain, but it's a very sort of intimate drama in 2 acts. First act takes place in contemporary times. Second act takes place in the 1960s, and it's about architects. And there's this brother and sister and their friend in the first act, and they're discussing their parents who were architects, and they have this groundbreaking building in New York, and they're all in New York, and but there's a mystery about this and that, and it sort of ends with wondering what happened in the first act. Second act, you're back in the 60s, and they are their parents. So that's kind of the setup. And when the woman from the agency called me to get me the job and tell me what to do, I sort of realized immediately what I wanted to do, which was somehow fuse the visual iconography of an architectural plan with Julia Roberts, and see if there was some way to blend them together. And this would appear in a full-page ad in the New York Times. And I think they said to me, we're going to do like 2 full-page ads in the New York Times, period. That's it. That's all we're doing. Which I thought made perfect sense. So I said to the woman on the phone, I said, well, I know what we should do. I should make Julia Roberts look like a floor plan for a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay, she says, and how are you going to do that? And I said, well, I think I know the right person, actually, that can really pull this off. And he's a genius illustrator named Christoph Niemann. I don't know if you know his work, but he does a lot of stuff for The New Yorker, of which this was one of the covers that had recently come out. And this, of course, I really loved. Totally caught my eye. And as you know about us New Yorkers, we're all obsessed with real estate. This is our version of pornography. And so in this, you see people obsessing over real estate in different ways. This guy's proposing to his girlfriend, saying, I can get you this great apartment. The dog, of course, wants a patio so he can go outside and pee and shit. And the guy at the bar is lamenting over his little studio. And this, just to me, this is Christoph at his best. It's just great. It works in so many ways. And I said, I think this guy could be able to turn Julia into this thing. And so called him up. He dropped everything and said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I think he did an absolutely brilliant job. So here's our equation. We take this. Okay, now you ready? How great is that? I think her lips are the couch. I thought that is so fucking great. That's exactly what I wanted. This was the first thing that he sent me, and you can see if this is a rough. Okay, now this sort of looks like her, but of course the key is the eyes. And when they're circles, they sort of look like her. But when they're triangles, they are her. How the hell does that happen? Amazing. All right, so we have, and we have the two other actors to deal with too. This guy, Paul Rudd, right? These are less finished drawings, but they show like how it was supposed to go. The bathtub in his hair. And some other guy, Bradley Cooper, who's on Alias, which I do not watch. So, of course, the agency is like, well, we think your idea is cool, but we want to see, like, some alternatives. We want to see, like, 3 different ideas. And, of course, I don't have 3 different ideas. I only have 1 idea. So, it's like, okay, here's 1 idea. Here's another idea. Totally different. And here is yet another brain-stretching 3rd idea, which of course doesn't work. I mean, when you do these things in negative, then the recollection factor just goes away. And I gave them even a 4th idea, which this is the one I like the best, with the seal of the Architectural Board of New York on the lower left. And so I sent these to the agency, who thought they were very interesting, who sent them on to the director, who sent me a long email basically saying, I totally appreciate all the work that you've done. All the thought that went into this is very, very impressive, and we would never use these in a million years. This play is not about architecture. This play is about romance. I want romance. And no people. And I thought, when I'm romantic, I'm usually romantic with somebody else. But we forged ahead. I decided, so I, gave Christoph a kill fee, very sorry, I wasted your time, etc., etc. And now I'm just thinking about, different kinds of imagery, photographic imagery. This, I thought, would speak to the 2 acts of the play, the past and the present. The effect of rain in New York, the title is actually very literal. There are 3 days of rain. There's like, rain coming down through the whole goddamn thing. And, how rain plays in New York when it's been raining like crazy, and then the sun comes out and you see these wonderful reflections in puddles, and I'm still like grasping onto the architectural aspect here. And trying to hail a cab in the rain and what that's like. And the director loved these. I would go with any one of them. The producer hated them. The producer said, "Where are the people?" But not Julia. This is art. We don't want to emphasize the movie star. She's just part of an ensemble. So now I'm going to try and go back to this concept and add people into it. Again, I'm obsessed with the 2-act thing, the past and the present. Then and now, how does rain play out in New York on streetlights in the street when you're walking around trying to get a cab and you can't? Then maybe we could do one poster that's about the parents and one that's about the kids. This one actually almost flew, and I think there were there's like 3 different producers, and I was only working with one of them. This world is very, very strange, I can tell you. Then the agency says, we're going to send you something, and it was this. And they sent over an image, and I redid the type, and I thought, this is just getting to be too too gooey, stupid Hallmark card bullshit. And I said, look, how about let's go back to the concept of a reflection. And if we've got these two people, how are they being reflected in the eyes of somebody else? And the agency, to their credit, came up with this, and it's slicker than I would have wanted. It's not as graphic as I would have wanted, but I thought it's not terrible. And they said this, like, everybody has signed off on this image. I'm like, fine. So I will just like spray some type on it. But again, where? I mean, where's the type going to go? I mean, this is I said, like, this is the kind of image that's like so high contrast. There's no like clear place for it to go. So we're going to like think outside of the box, and we're going to box the image and then put all the stuff around it. And of course, really what they want is they want you to see Julia Roberts' name first. So she's in the upper left-hand corner because we go top to bottom, left to right. So there she is. And, you know, it's not terrible, it's not embarrassing, and my name went on it, but I did feel like, you know, it's Julia Roberts on Broadway in a theater probably about this big for 13 weeks only. If you spell her name right and give a phone number where people can buy tickets, can't we take a few chances? And they said no. I've been doing James Ellroy's book covers for years. He's one of my favorite authors. He's sort of like the neo-noir LA. He's got a movie coming out this year of one of his books called The Black Dahlia, which is going to be absolutely amazing. And anyway, I was asked to repackage some of his earlier books in paperback, and I read them. Of course, I had read them before, and this is me sort of in what I call magpie mode, which is I'm working on like 10 to 20 projects simultaneously in various states of completion and development. So in this case, I'm just going to start wandering around looking for stuff and keeping in mind I need to find some art for these books for James. And I was in a gallery in Chelsea, and I saw the work of this photographer named Tom Allen. And what he does is he takes pre-existing books, old pulp paperbacks, and he cuts around the characters on the covers, and then he folds them, and then he re-photographs them to quite amazing effect. And I saw this picture. I just saw this picture. And this Blood on the Moon is about two rival cops in the LAPD, and I just love the idea that like they're so going at it that they're the one is going to like literally punch the other one out of the book. I thought that was great. And then the next one is about a serial killer, and now this is two different books that Alan has like positioned and photographed. Both these images were totally pre-existing. For the third one in the series, he set this up based on the manuscript, and now again multiple books that are put out to simulate a hill. And Ellroy just is over the moon about these. He really likes them. Augustin Burroughs also has a movie coming out this summer called Running with Scissors, which by all rumors is going to be amazing. And I did not do the cover of that memoir, but I did the cover of the follow-up memoir, which is called This. And this is his account of trying to recover from alcoholism. When he was in his 20s, he was a hotshot ad exec in New York City and an alcoholic, which of course is rather redundant, but for him, it was really becoming a problem, even though he didn't think so, and all of his coworkers could see this. And basically they said, look, you're either going to have to go into rehab or you will be fired, and P.S., you will probably die. And so he said, okay. And so he does go into rehab, and he writes about this, and he's very skeptical of the whole thing, and then he comes to realize that, yes, actually, this was a real problem. So for me, it was very, very obvious what should be done for the cover, which is a type design, and this is basically Type 101. We used to get this assignment in Type 101, take a word and then make it look like what it says. This is the opposite. Take a word and make it look like it's in denial. So basically it's telling you one thing when you can clearly look at it and see that it's something else, which is basically the situation that he was in. And it's just following through on all of the typography on the front and the spine. It's all running and dripping and basically just coming undone. His follow-up memoir is called This, and this title refers to a kind of form of mild psychosis in which you think that you're affecting physical properties in the world with your brain, which you clearly are not. It's almost kind of like a weird form of superstition, like if you're in a plane and you want the plane to land properly, you have to cross all your fingers and then close your eyes and hum the theme to the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And you land safely. And you don't land safely because of what the pilot did. You land safely because you just did that. So I was trying to figure out how to somehow visually show this concept. And the art director said, why don't you just have a faucet that is turned on and the water's coming out, but instead of pouring down, it's pouring up. And I said, well, that's interesting, but let's not do a faucet. Let's have a person involved. So that's actually me pouring the glass. And I did this with the photographer Jeff Spear, who I've worked with for many, many years and done books with for a long time together. And he has a studio in Soho, and I like going down there and working very closely with him. And I got there around 2 in the afternoon, and we did the whole setup of the shot, but it wasn't until about 10 o'clock that we finally got the water to pour up. Again and again, we tried, and finally, my brain was just throbbing, and finally it did go up, and he had the whole setup ready, and we got the shot, but it was just very, very painful. Augustine's next book is called This, and this is, there's no better feeling in the world when either the author or the art director calls you up and says, okay, I've got the new Augustine Burroughs book, and this is what it's called. And in this case, it was Augustine called me himself. He said, what do you think of this title? And I said, I think it's a great title, and I know exactly what the jacket should be. And he said, what? Tell me. And I said, no, I can't tell you. I have to show you. And again, so I went back to Jeff to do a photo shoot. And what we did was we put an ad in the Village Voice to try and find this person. We gave a description, and we got a lot of responses. A lot of them were kooks and people who were just goofing. But then we actually found this guy and photographed him, and it was really great. He was a really terrific guy. And the art director said that, oh my God, everybody loves this cover. He said, but the thing is, in the marketing meeting, you could tell there were people on the marketing staff that really liked it and didn't get it. They liked it because it was yellow and it had a hand on it. I am on staff at KNOF. I have been since the fall of 1986. This October will mark my 20th year. Here are a few jackets that are coming out this summer. This is particularly appropriate to the Walker Art Center. The Theft is a novel about art thieves and forgery. And I thought that you can't really see it there, but there is sort of like a dust mark, like there has been a painting on the wall and it's gone. And I thought I'd be able to find this through a stock agency, but we couldn't. We had to stage the whole thing. This was a no-go. David Remnick is the editor-in-chief of The New Yorker and has been for many years now. And this is a collection of his reporting pieces. This to me the concept is like a simple visual rebus. You investigate, and then you tell. He thought that was amusing, but it didn't really speak to the act of writing. And I couldn't really argue with that. So I kind of went back to like the meat of what he does, which is the words themselves. And I tried to imagine him as a sort of like dissident like if you're in your basement and you're like printing these handbills for your cause, and you kind of like run out of like blank paper, so you just like take your manuscript pages that you threw away and you're printing your handbills on them. So it's almost as if he took pages from the New Yorker that pre-existed and like ripped them up and then printed the fact that he had written a book on top of them in red ink. This he liked. This will be out, I think, in like a month or two. This is very hard to explain. Michel Houellebecq. This is a fucked up novel from France. Michel Houellebecq is widely regarded as the enfant terrible of modern French letters. Personally, I regard him as simply terrible. But that's just me, and I, this is part of my job, and I've got to rise to the occasion. Oh yes. It sure is fun creating book jackets for the preeminent art critic in America. As a matter of fact, it actually is, but the intensity factor is pretty high. But he doesn't, he's not as hard on me as he is, say, Donald Judd or something like that, because it's a different thing, a piece of art. And his book cover, he wrote, as you may or may not know, a seminal book of art criticism called The Shock of the New, which we then repackaged in the early 90s, and I did this cover for that, and the colored part was raised up and glossy, whereas the rest of it was matte. So it looked like somebody, like stuck a subversive sticker on top of it. And this fall, he has his memoir coming out, which is called This, and I was trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do for this. I don't want to show any kind of piece of art on it. I don't want to show him. He didn't want us to show him on the front. It has to be a typographic solution, and so basically I just decided to rip myself off, which he was fine with, and I think enough time has passed since the other cover that it's not going to be an issue. So that'll be out in the fall. This is the title of Jay McInerney's book, a new novel, which came out about a month ago. And he wrote the Bright Lights Big City, and he's very much about chronicling the sort of like well-to-do society New Yorkers of the new generation and all of their decadent nightclubbing and doing all the stuff that they do. But now they've grown up in this book, and the main characters are. It starts on the eve of 9/11, and the next day they realize they've lost 3 or 4 of their best friends who were in the towers when they came down, and then it's about how they cope with that and deal with that and blah blah blah. And upon reading it, it immediately was like, we've got to use pictures of Ground Zero, and which had not been done on a cover of a novel about the event, and it certainly, of course, it had been done ad infinitum on nonfiction books about it, but to do it on a book of fiction seemed radical at the time, or I mean, what the time is now. But it didn't really ever enter my mind that this couldn't be done feasibly and be done in an interesting way, especially given that title. The Magnum did an incredible book of photos on Ground Zero that I went through to find things, and there's a very there's a designer clothing store across the street called Century 21 where there's a rack of designer suits. They were all covered in ash, and then on the spine a glass of wine left over from a nearby restaurant, and then somebody's coffee table on the front that they had taken the picture of, and that to me, that is kind of like what the book is, that you had this life at one point, and then just a second later it can completely change. All right, now to lighten things up a little bit, I'm going to do an impression for you. When I used to teach at the School of Visual Arts in New York, I taught graduate graphic design portfolio, and I would, one of the assignments was the students all had to create, learn, and perfect an impression, because that is what we do as designers. We are making impressions on our audience, on our clients. And so let's do it in the classroom first, so that we can get a feel for it. So I only know how to do one impression, but that is okay. That's all I need to know. So what you will be asked to imagine is Margaret Hamilton in her role as the Wicked Witch of the West, reciting the first several lines of the 23rd Psalm.
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leadeth me to lie in pastures green.
Thank you. Which leads us to vertical. Who or what is vertical? As well may you ask. They are the freelance client that they tell you in school that you will never ever get, which is somebody who is making something that you love, that you are asked to design, and you are basically allowed to do whatever you want. Who are they? They are this. They're a hardcover publishing startup in New York. They are Japanese expatriates, and their idea is to take books that were literally big in Japan and bring them over here and translate them into English and try and make them popular here. And they came to me about 2 years ago, and they said, we want you to be our art director. We want you to design everything we do, invent us visually. And it kind of scared the shit out of me because it sounded to me like a full-time job. I have a full-time job, which I like. I do design. I do freelance on the side, but I didn't want to leave Knopf. And they said, you don't have to. Our list is small. You won't have to. The authors will have no say in anything you do, which. That made me sit up straight. And I thought, all right, let's give it a shot, and if it doesn't work, I can just, bolt. So we had to start with a logo, and the only sort of thing that was a given was this stupid name, Vertical, which means nothing. But I don't know where they came up with it, but I guess they thought, oh, we are a vertical publisher, we are upright or something, I don't know. It's dumb. But anyway. Here is the stationery, and this verticalized Japanese woman is their logo, and haha, the type is going horizontal. But on the spines of all the books, it does go vertically down at the bottom, the colophon. And so this is just, I'm going to show you a smattering of stuff I've done for them, and it's really been a very refreshing experience for me in terms of book design in many ways. Chiefly among them is because it's, what I hear all the time is,
oh, the author's name isn't big enough. Make it bigger. Make the author's name bigger.
And, having written a book myself, I kind of understand that a little bit, but these are a group of authors that no one's ever heard of. No one is going to go into the local Barnes & Noble and say, I'd like the new Kaori Ikuni. So the strategy with these is they've got to work as objects. They've got to work as, hopefully beautiful objects that actually mean something that you will see in a bookstore and you want to pick up. That's my visual strategy. We're not like playing on the notoriety of any of the authors or the titles or anything. So anyway, Twinkle Twinkle is it's a kind of like frothy domestic comedy of contemporary Tokyo, and two of the characters are peering out of die-cut holes on the jacket. So when you take the jacket off, you get this this on the binding underneath, and which is from a vintage paper toy in Japan that I bought when I was there. Naoko is a mystery novel about a woman who, mysteriously beautiful woman who hangs out in bars and picks up these men, takes them home, and then nobody ever sees the men again. And this guy that's investigating her. And so I wanted this to look like a sort of like chic perfume packaging that she might buy, or a book of matches from one of the bars that she hangs out in. This is not legible. It's this is the first in the Ring trilogy that was made into the movie The Ring. This is by a guy named Koji Suzuki, who is the Stephen King of Japan. Yes, he really is. And it's about a deadly videotape that if you watch this thing and if you don't get somebody else to watch it within a week, then you die. So it's this cycle of you have to keep this thing perpetuating. And for this series of books, I was experimenting with surfaces and materials of clear plastic jackets that have one optical pattern on them, played on the bindings of the books, which have a different optical pattern playing on them, and then this sense of disorientation that you get when they come together. So the first is Ring on the left, Spiral is on the right. The third is Loop, which just came out about a month ago, and this one I think really gets finally gets the visual formula right, where you get this like swirling sort of like vertigo by looking at it. This is a collection of short stories then by the same author, which is designed so that when you see it at a distance in a bookstore, you can see the woman's face, but then when you get closer to it, she sort of like dissipates and goes away. This is a 3-layered jacket. Ashes is a collection of short stories about an aging member of the Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia. And he is reminiscing about his life and, again, like hanging out in bars where he gets drunk and remembers all this crazy shit that he did, and then he shoots up the bar and causes all this havoc. And I wanted to give a multi-layered jacket which speaks to the way Japanese package a lot of their popular novels and books, which is what we call obies or belly bands, but they're usually used just for advertising for other books on them. This I wanted to incorporate the design in a meaningful way. So I'm ripping off dry here. The first layer is the Ashes layer, and that is on an uncoated white stock, and it's almost as if he was writing something on a napkin at the bar and then he spilled a drink on it. When you peel that layer back, you get this montage that I made of vintage Japanese matchbooks that I bought when I was over there, which could be from the bars that this guy goes to. And then when you pull that back, then you finally get, at least to him, even though it's only a part of him, you never get to fully know who he is. But he then is on the binding of the book itself. This is a period novel of World War II from the Japanese point of view. They are trying to get a top secret plane out of Tokyo into Berlin. This is a metaphysical novel about a woman who believes that she's a porthole between the spiritual world and the physical world. The 3 black areas are die-cut holes. When you peel that back, it looks more like an electrical outlet now, and then you see that it's a novel underneath. This is about a troubled little boy, schoolboy, and the teacher who is reaching out to him, and he is obsessed with flies. This is a ghost story about a guy who is actually haunted by the ghost of his father. This is about an aging painter and him trying to impart his life lessons onto his students. This is about a very, very naughty young lady. Again, it's not what you show, it's what you imply. This is their first nonfiction book. Ha ha ha, the image is turned upside down, so now it looks like Constantinople really is falling. This was one of the few preconceived ideas I had for a book cover that I never had previously been able to apply to anything. This is book jacket as secret decoder. You're seeing the front, spine, and back of the jacket and binding. This Sayonara Gangsters is a very conceptual novel about a poet in Japan who is teaching a classroom full of gangsters how to write poetry. and all these kind of weird things happen. It's very surreal. It's very magic realism, and like somebody will say something in the book, and then the words will literally come out of their mouth and fall onto the floor, and then somebody can pick them up and throw them at somebody else and whack them in the head with it. So I wanted the idea of the jacket to act the way the teacher in the classroom does. That is, he translates how all of this is made to them. So you can only read the title of the book when the jacket is on the book. And so the white ovals are die-cut holes through which the letters peer out. If you take the jacket off of the book, you'll see in the lower right, it becomes this kind of like insane, almost sort of word search puzzle that doesn't make any sense. So the title only makes sense when the jacket's on the book. And the real appeal to me of working with Vertical was that they figured out a way to translate Osamu Tezuka's 8-volume graphic novel Life of the Buddha and publish it in an economically feasible way. I had known about this project for years, and I knew that several publishers tried to figure out how to do this, and they all gave up because it's such a massive thing. But with the resurgence of the graphic novel, which I'm very much involved in at Pantheon, it was deemed that there might be an audience for this. Osamu Tezuka is literally the Walt Disney of Japan, except he actually wrote and drew everything. He invented Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion, but his take on the life of the Buddha was his real life's work. And he had died a good 15 years ago, so I had to use all pre-existing art. And this really is a tremendously heartfelt, beautiful volume, set of books that are just, it's all based on the real life of the Buddha, and then Tezuka brings so much more into it and makes it even into a rousing adventure story, which is really, really quite amazing. So these are the fronts of the first 4. It is an 8-volume series. Volume 8 just came out about 2 weeks ago. And when all of the books are on your shelf, you see Buddha age from Volume 1 to Volume 8. And just quickly a little bit about my monograph. About 2.5 years ago, Rizzoli, publisher, contacted me about doing a big comprehensive monograph of my work, and it was very hard for me to say no, so I didn't. But at the same time, I mean, usually I do everything myself. I'm a real control freak. I like to do all the design, the writing, the ba. For this, I knew that I would have to relinquish the design to somebody else, and I found the perfect person. It's a guy named Mark Melnick, who I had hired at Vintage Books a good 6 years ago. A very talented young freelance designer now, and he did a terrific job there. Decided he wanted to go freelance, so he knew the work and he was up to the task. And this was the kind of logistics we were talking about. It's like, how the heck do we organize this thing? If you do it chronologically, you get tripped up because what about, I wanted to lump all the jackets that I did for John Updike in one place. So if you do it chronologically, you can't do that because Updike's too prolific, and it all gets spaced out. You could do it, organize it by fiction, nonfiction, poetry, but then what happens when you have an author who's written a novel and not some nonfiction? Again, I wanted those things to be together. So it was a very sort of organic process. And Mark had to kind of like sort through all this stuff. And one of the things that he came up with was the fact that the book should be horizontal, which never occurred to me. But he said this makes perfect sense because the covers themselves are vertical rectangles. So they will fit into this space pretty much full size, actual size, and then you can, off to the right, you can show the resource material that went into making them. In this particular case, vintage cigarette packs. This shows a cover for another Japanese author, Haruki Murakami. This is a Knopf book. It's not a vertical book, and It shows this montage I made. I made an elephant out of German beer vats from the 1930s. And then there were the books that we didn't know what to do with, and then Mark came up with some very, very clever ideas. The Man Who Ate Everything is food writing by the food writer of Vogue magazine, Jeffrey Steingarten, which sounds very strange. It's like being the fashion writer for Gourmet. But he's actually really, really good. So, okay, here's the man who ate everything, and is taking a bite out of the jacket on the spine. So that's on the left-hand page. On the right-hand page, Mark put a collection of short stories by Thomas Beller, and then to the right of that, a collection of poems by Vikram Seth, and I just didn't get it. And I said, what is this? And he said, well, it's kind of like it's a visual narrative. You eat, and then you brush your teeth, and then you go to sleep. And I thought, wow, I never would have thought of that in a million years. Like 3 completely different books, 3 completely different authors, 3 completely different publishers, different times. And this is another spread. I call this Tell and Show, celebrity memoir, Katharine Hepburn and Marlene Dietrich. And the idea is that Hepburn is about language. You read this book and you really feel like she's sitting across the table talking to you. And the Dietrich book was by her daughter, which is no less engaging, but it's the concept that you listen to Hepburn, you look at Dietrich. And these are both Knopf books that came out relatively around the same time. This is another narrative spread. This is the Guy spread, a novel by Joseph O'Neill next to memoirs by William Trevor, and then across from a play by Doctorow and a novel by Richler. And this is the Guy spread. So the guy goes to work, he comes home from work, he takes off his hat, he has a drink, and he has a smoke. Right, so then we had to figure out this, and this was, no small task. This is a book about book covers, and we had to do something that spoke to bookness, and that was hopefully going to be something that we hadn't seen before, but made sense. So Mark had said, your hands appear in a lot of these jackets. And he really went through everything that I had saved, which was a lot. And just, even though it's not obvious, like the hand pouring the water in magical thinking, he said, your hands are there a lot. So I think your hands should be on the cover, and we should show a book. And so we eventually came up with this, and that's the back cover. And we'll see what we do with that. And we had budgeted for 300 pages, 9 by 12, full color. And at the 11th hour, we had to send the whole thing to press, maybe like March. In January of last year, whenever it was, he came to me with his face just ashen, saying, I finally figured out that to fit all the stuff that we want to fit in the book, we need 100 more pages. 100. And that's like, cutting the. So I basically went back, crawling on my knees to Rizzoli and said, we need 100 more pages for the book. And, once they brace themselves and pick themselves up off the floor, they said, okay, you've got it. So we had this project that started out, in a certain kind of size and then grew out to another size that we hadn't anticipated. So we wanted to visually depict a project that had outgrown itself, that had become something more than we had intended. And so the idea was that you get a vessel that looks like it's supposed to house a certain size of book, and then the pages grow out of it. And this really, really made sense to me. Of course, it didn't make sense to Rizzoli at all, who they totally freaked because they were worried that it would get damaged in shipment. But they did relent. When you open up the front cover, you get the shameless kids sell picture of me, and then off to the left of that is the list of writers that I got who very graciously agreed to write something for the inside of the book. Chief among them was John Updike, who did the introduction, which I was just absolutely, I will be forever in his thrall for doing that. But I wanted you to open it up immediately and see, okay, writer, that all these people wrote original material for the book. The back takes a quote from Updike, and when you open that up, it's a much later picture of me facing an interview that I wrote with myself, which is absolutely fascinating. And that's the 3/4 view. And that's the thumb-a-rama view. And just a couple of quick things before I mercifully end this. I'm not a big believer in rules. I think we should keep an open mind when we're working on stuff. But just here's two. I saw this one book in a bookstore not too long ago. A punchy independent bookstore that had lots of independent press poetry and that kind of thing. And I saw this cover on the shelf, and I couldn't believe it. I said, I have to buy that and then put it into my lecture. And I don't like to dump on other people's work. It's just that this was so emblematic to me of something that you shouldn't do. And I mean, basically, I don't know who the designer is. I don't care. But we had this really great teacher at school. I went to Penn State, majored in graphic design. This guy named Lanny Samis. And he came in one day, and he went up to the blackboard, and he drew a picture of an apple, and then he wrote the word apple underneath. And then he said, okay, listen up. And he covered up the word apple, and he said, you either show this, and then he covered up the picture of the apple, and he said, or you say this, but you don't do this. This person did this. And whether this, Arthur Vogelzang held a gun to his head and said, I want the title and the image, it just, this is basically saying to your audience, you're a fucking moron. However, I also saw this book cover several years ago and made it my own, and it's enchanted me ever since. We moved our offices at Random House about 3 years ago from this office that we had been in for 30 years. So everybody purges books in the great move, and there's piles of things everywhere that people are getting rid of things, and you think, oh, I don't need 3 copies of this, I can do with just 2, so you get rid of one, and then you see somebody else has gotten rid of something that you really want, so you take that, and so nobody ever really gets rid of anything. But there was this one paperback from the 50s on a shelf by itself, and it totally caught my eye. And when I looked at it, I didn't really realize what I was looking at, and then I did. I figured it out. And this is a real, genuine book cover. Designer is uncredited. This is a Pocket Book, is the publisher, from the 1950s. Now, the title of this book is You Shall Know Them. But the designer has somehow encrypted it with a subliminal message so that when you see it, you feel strangely compelled to approach it and pick it up and check it out. And how they've achieved this to this day, I do not know. But it just, it mesmerizes me. And lastly, just I want to give you a kind of like a life lesson tip that my parents passed on to me when I was very young. And they would, read us stories before we went to bed and then kiss us goodnight. And right before they turned off the light in our room, they would say this to us. And I've never, ever forgotten it. And I've tried to live by this code my entire life. And if I'm anything like a success, it's due to this. Life is not a spectator sport, and I've always tried to live by this credo, and besides the fact that I think it's actually a pretty good metaphor for the design process itself. So if you come away with only one memory of this evening, I hope it's this. And I thank you very much.
As Andrew explained earlier, we're going to do some, we have some time for Q&A, and we're going to do it a little differently this evening. We've got the ushers with microphones, so if you have a question, just flag them down, and I will turn it back over to Chip to call out the questioners.
Oh, just shriek.
When does your next novel come out?
Oh, wow. When does my next novel come out? If my publisher has any way to say about it, it'll be next year. I've missed the deadline twice. I'm about 2/3 of the way into it. It is a sequel to The Cheese Monkeys, but I'm trying to write it as a standalone thing so that if you didn't read The Cheese Monkeys, which a remarkable number of people didn't, if you didn't read The Cheese Monkeys, you can pick this up and still get something out of it. So the whole writing thing, I wish it came as easily as the design stuff does, but it doesn't. So, but I have to deliver this thing by the end of the year. I need to get it done, and it's the weirdest thing because I had it completely plotted out when I sent them an outline and the whole thing, and I will never, ever sell a novel based on 40 pages again. I don't recommend it, at least for me. With The Cheese Monkeys, my agent insisted I finish the first draft before she would shop it to anybody because she said nobody's going to be able to believe you can pull it off. And so she was right. All right, here's 3 answers to the stock questions. Yes, I read the books. Or if there's not time, at least I get some kind of tip sheet so that I can pretend that I've read the book. No, I have no idea how any of you can get into book design or publishing. I have no advice to you whatsoever. And 3, yes, they're real. It's all right, just yell it out.
All right. When you're in the concepting stages of presenting all of these covers, and say for the play, for instance, do you have to rely on the stock photography, or are you quickly setting up photo shoots to capture some of that?
That's a really good question. The question is, to what extent do I rely on stock photography for things? To what extent do I do photo shoots? For the 3 Days of Rain project, which she's asking about, I made this decision that I wanted to pursue it, but that I wasn't going to like tie somebody else into it creatively. Like I felt really bad that I felt Christoph did exactly what I asked him to, and I thought he did it brilliantly, and then it just all got rejected across the board, and I felt terrible about that, and I didn't want to do that to somebody else for that particular project. The nice thing about, I'm on staff at Knopf. It doesn't pay great, but it pays reasonably well, and health benefits and all this kind of stuff. So with a lot of the freelance, and this is going to sound horribly diva-esque, like if it's all going south and it's a nightmare, at this point I feel I can just say, you know what, this isn't working out, so let's just stop. In this particular case, I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to try and see it through and get something that was actually going to get produced, that I had something to do with, that I felt that I could solve this problem. So many of the Broadway graphics are so bad. I mean, they're just terrible, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. It's very similar, actually, in its own way, to why most movie posters look so terrible. But once they scotched the actors as floor plans idea, I decided, okay, that's it, stock photography. and I was just gonna look and look and look and look and look and look and just use pre-existing stuff, maybe alter it a little bit or whatever. But I made a very conscious effort to not do that. Now, the converse of that is working mostly with my friend Jeff. All the Augustine Borough stuff, that's all custom shot for the project based on a very specific idea. The theft cover, I think I had said something about that. I thought that I would be able to find an interesting image of a wall that used to have a picture on it and doesn't anymore. And when you look at that wall, you can tell that right away. Couldn't find it. And so this photographer, Jason Fulford, who's really terrific, staged the whole thing and could stage it for relatively little money. Because we always have relatively little money. So it all depends. There's all different kinds of factors at play, determining whether you can custom make imagery for a project or whether you try and find it pre-existing. Yes?
Do you still have your Robin costume, and what do you think of the current movies, Batman Begins and the new Superman?
Are you seeing anyone?
I'm married.
I'm staying at the Millennium Hotel. The official hotel of the Walker Art Center. I don't have any of the original Robin costume. I have the cape of the Batman costume, which at some point I should frame and put on the wall. I did photograph it for this book I did called Batman Collected. What do I think of the movies? What do I think of the Batman movies? I thought the last one came the closest. I just have a problem with the fact that Katie Holmes seemed to have wandered in from a Pantax commercial that she was making. I didn't like that. And they can't make the Batman suit look like Batman. It has to look like a big, bulky, black suit of clunky armor. And that's just so, I don't know. It just takes all of it out of it for me. And that particular Batman Begins, it's like Spider-Man 2 was like the best ultimate duel on a moving subway train that anybody's ever done. So let's just not do that anymore. And of course, what's the end of Batman Begins? A superhero duel on a moving subway train. So that, those three things sort of sucked it right out of me.
I have a question over here. What's it like designing your own book cover? What kind of process do you go through? Is it any different? Does it hold you back a little bit in your writing or your design?
The thing about designing my own book covers is I have a lot more affection for the author than I usually do. Unless I have a lot more contempt for him. It all depends on what day it is. When I was doing the cover for the Cheese Monkeys, I very much wanted to have Chris Ware involved because he's one of my best friends and he's a genius. So I tried to figure out how to do that in a meaningful way. I think hopefully we did. And then Jeff was involved with shooting paper textures and things like that. I have a concept in my head what the next novel should look like. And I want to use an artist named Charles Burns, who I've been working with on his book Black Hole. And so we'll see. For my first book as author was this coffee table thing called Batman Collected, which was Little Brown in the late 90s. And I very consciously made my name about that big as a sort of see, you don't have to make the author name so big all the time to everybody. And then when we did a paperback edition of it, I made it a good deal larger. I guess, I think, not that this has much to do with your question, but part of the problem as I go on with this is that there'll be certain authors that come to me that want me to design their book covers because they think that will solve all their problems for them. They think that will make their book a bestseller. And it does not work that way. It's I do covers for David Sedaris's books. They go straight to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and I have nothing to do with that. It's because of the writing. So, I mean, and it's the writing, and then the writing striking a chord within a mass audience. That is what makes those books bestsellers. My covers are icing on the cake, period. That's it. So my favorite example to other people is, I did the cover of my own novel. The novel did okay. It didn't do great. So if I can't guarantee it for myself, I can't guarantee it for anybody else.
It seems that the collecting of ephemera from around the world plays a big part in how you think and refer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have like a warehouse in New Jersey, or how do you keep up with this?
That's so funny, because I spent the afternoon today at Chuck Anderson's studio, which is a repository of all this stuff. No, I mean, I have my own version of that, which is much, much smaller. Living and working in New York, and not being Madonna, there are logistical problems to space that you have. So I have a modest-sized one-bedroom, I have a modest-sized office, and you just kind of learn to, you file things away in different ways. And certainly now with scanning stuff, if somebody comes to me and they're a photographer and I like a bunch of their work, I don't do color Xeroxes anymore. I do scans, and I put them in files and have that on hand. So, but yes, I mean, if you were to see my apartment or my office, there's all this crap all over the place. But there are limitations. Yes. It's okay.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Alex Ross? Your working relationship, I should say.
My relationship with Alex Ross. For those of you who breathe through your noses and don't know who Alex Ross is, he's a comic book artist. He has been widely hailed as the Norman Rockwell of comics, which, if you can imagine Norman Rockwell painting Superman and Batman, that's pretty much what the work is. And personally, I'm a big fan, and to such an extent that I undertook doing an entire book of his work, which is, I curated the whole thing, wrote it, designed it, worked very closely with him. We did a 6-page Batman and Superman story for the end of it, which I wrote and then he painted. But he paints them all to look like they're actual real people. And within the comics community, there's, today I had lunch with somebody who said, well, I don't know, it's not really comics to me. I'm a big comics fan. I appreciate what he does. He's a lot of skill, but it's not comics to me, because it's not flat looking, and it's not like dark black ink lines with color in them. And it's not. It's something very much different. It looks like the best production art for the best superhero movie that will never get made. So I mean, that's how I feel about him. I think he's great. We did this book together and we're still friends. So that kind of says something, and that's a whole other geeky conversation we could have, over drinks sometime or something like that. Yeah.
There. How important do you think you travel a lot? It sounds like. Do you find it really important in terms of your scraps and pieces and collecting your ideas?
What does the role of travel play in the design process? I think there is the literally, what do I want to say? If I'm in a strange place and I have time and I can figure out how to, I will go to a flea market there, because that's a great way to learn something about the culture that you might not normally be able to, and also get great stuff. I think travel in general, it can be a real hassle because of the way it is now, but I think it's worth doing. I think it's worth endeavoring to do, and seeing how other cultures create graphic design where it is, how you see it, how you experience it. It can be very different than what you're used to, and I think different than what you're used to is a good part of the design process, because it's good not to get too particularly comfortable with how you're regularly how you respond to things. I think you should be like open to constantly rethinking. I mean, that's my personal philosophy. I don't like to have a set style. I want to try and rework my sensibility to each particular project based on what the project is and based on the requirements and the inherent content of what the project is. Well, thank you all for coming.